Welcome to Your Iconic Image. If you want to take control of your image and be a power player in your space, then this is the show for you. Here we will arm you with tools and information to help you grow your brand on purpose. I'm your host, Marlana Semenza, photographer and visual strategist. Now let's dive into today's episode. Todd Cherches is the CEO and co-founder of BigBlueGumball, a New York City-based management consulting firm specializing in leadership development and executive coaching. He is also the author of the groundbreaking book, VisuaLeadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you so much, Marlana. Great to be here with you.
So I know why I think that visuals are so important. Why do you believe that they're so powerful?
A lot of reasons. The main one is that we all need to get others to see what we're saying, right? That's the biggest challenge, whether it's an email, a TED Talk, a conversation, a text. We're trying to get an idea or a thought out of our head and into someone else's head. And one of the best ways to do that is to think and to communicate visually. So whether that's through photographs, as you do so amazingly well, or through drawing, or through using props, whatever it is, or even visual language using metaphor and storytelling. So those are all the different ways that I help to teach and coach people to think and communicate more visually.
So I know you use the term visual thinking. So what does that mean?
To me, there are different definitions, but to me, it's about thinking and communicating in pictures as opposed to words or numbers. So often in the business world, we're talking about ideas or financial statements or whatever, but it really is about painting a picture with words. It's that's why the saying "a picture's worth 1,000 of them" is around in all cultures. And it's almost like the equivalent of Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, and PowerPoint slides, right? That's the PowerPoint, that's the equivalent of that. So we produce words in Word documents, we produce numbers on Excel spreadsheets, and then we produce slides to help us communicate more visually if it's done well. So many people are still doing the bullet points and reading off the screen kind of thing, which is not doing it well. But the bottom line is really about getting ideas out there into the world so that other people can understand them. And I talk about three things in my TED Talk: ACR, attention, comprehension, and retention. When you use visual imagery or visual language, it captures people's attention and gets them to focus because they're looking at something. So in today's world of interruptions and distractions and information overload, that's one of the biggest challenges, just to rein people in and get them to focus. Comprehension, it enhances our understanding, and retention, it increases our recall, our memory, and if we can remember things, we're more likely to use them and apply them. So those are some of the science behind why visuals are so impactful. And just as humans, we're just wired visually. That's just who we are and how our brains work.
And it was interesting because I did watch your TED Talk, and you reinforced an idea that I'd heard once upon a time, that it doesn't matter what language we speak because images and pictures and things like that transcend all languages.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about how you came to that discovery.
Sure. Well, a lot of people think because I'm an executive coach and I do management leadership training consulting that I have a business background, but I actually have an English literature background with a concentration in Shakespeare and poetry. And if you think about literature and poetry, it is about storytelling. It's about metaphor. It's about language, right? So that's in my roots. I was big reader going back a long time. And then my first part of my career was working in advertising and then media and entertainment and theme parks. So advertising is a visually based business. Even if you're doing radio ads, you still need to communicate visually. And working in the movie industry, the TV industry, and then the theme park business, again, it's all about storytelling, right? I know that's a big part of your work is visual storytelling. It's every story, there are villains, victims, and heroes. There's an obstacle, there's some kind of quest or goal. There's obstacles, barriers, or challenges that stand in your way. There's a beginning, middle, and end. There's some kind of resolution at some point. We always talk about how you are the hero of your own life story, right? So there's all kinds of metaphors that come out of the world of entertainment and media. And that's a big part of my coaching is getting people to think of themselves as the hero of their life story. And then now what do you do with that, right? How do you create a happy ending to your story through the coaching and the training? So those are just a few of the concepts behind, but it's rooted in my background in literature and in the entertainment and media industry.
What about the people that come to you and say, yes, but I'm not a creative and I'm not a visual person?
Yeah, well, one thing I say is that we're all visual, right, in different ways. So we're all there's something called VARK, visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. And at one point, they were identified as learning styles, as if you're a visual person, but you're an auditory person. But the reality is they're just different sensory modalities for taking in and processing information. So we're all visual, we're all auditory at different times. So it really is about forming imagery in our mind. A question I often get asked, and I just was asked this the other day, what about for people who are blind or sight impaired in some way? You could still use metaphor, you could still use visual language, you could still paint a picture with words, right? So you could still create, so that's, it doesn't apply only to sight, it applies mainly to the way we think and visualize things. And when you talk about leadership, one of the biggest words that comes to mind is vision, right? We talk about visionary leaders or having a leadership vision. And what does that mean? It's about picturing in your mind's eye, which is a term coined by Shakespeare. And I know that because I was an English literature and Shakespeare major. He said that in Hamlet, when he saw the ghost of his father, he didn't know if it was an apparition or a figment of his imagination. I see my father in my mind's eye. How do you get an image from your mind's eye into someone else's? That's one of the biggest challenges that we all face. So all of these things tie together, but those are some of the reasons why it's so embedded in the way I think and the way I work, and now how I apply it to my training and coaching and teaching.
So what are some of the most effective ways you have seen this manifest?
Well, I break it down to 4 categories. One is using visual imagery and or drawing. Category 2 is using mental models and or frameworks. Category 3 is using metaphor and analogy. And category 4 is using storytelling with bonus points for humor if and when appropriate. So those are the 4 buckets, and they're not mutually exclusive in silos. When used in combination, they're even more powerful. So you can have a metaphor and then tell a story about it, or you can have a mental model that is is drawn out by hand, or you can describe it, verbally, right? So the way my clients use this, or I use this in my teaching, is it transcends language barriers, cultural barriers. Like if I say to you, we need to plant the seed for a new idea, we need to get to the root of the problem, we need to branch out in new directions, we need to see which ideas bear fruit, and the sky's the limit. I just use 5 or 6 different analogies or metaphors that use nature or a tree as the foundation, right? So when you use imagery like that, it helps people to picture what you're saying. So it creates clarity. But a good metaphor, just as a good metaphor can create clarity, a poorly chosen metaphor can actually do the opposite and create confusion and chaos. So I use a lot of baseball analogies because I'm a big baseball fan, Mets and Yankees. But if I'm talking to a 25-year-old student of mine from China, she doesn't know anything about baseball, most likely. So something with theater or dance or nature or something that from her culture will resonate more than using a metaphor, analogy, or story that is meaningful to me. So it's always starting with who's your audience, what's your purpose, and what's going to resonate with this person. So if we are aware of this, we could be more strategic and more intentional, because we don't even realize how often we use metaphors or tell stories. But it's a big part of, once you're aware of it, then you could be even better at it.
Agreed. Go back to those 4 buckets and break those down for us a little bit.
Sure. The first one is using visual imagery. So for example, and I'm doing this even though we're on video, some people may listen to the audio podcast. So I may say, something's the tip of the iceberg, right? So you picture in your mind an iceberg, and from an iceberg image that about 10% is above the surface and the other 80 or 90% is below the surface. So the iceberg represents, as a metaphor, so it's both a visual image and a metaphor, what we see and or know versus what we don't. And we always know there's more that we don't. So when we first meet someone, that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you start watching a movie, the first 5 or 10 minutes of it, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So again, it always reminds us that there's more coming, and that it's up to us to dive beneath the surface to uncover what else is down there, right? Iceberg could also, thinking about Titanic, can represent danger ahead, right? What are the dangers lurking underneath that we need to be aware of, right? So just from that one image, you can have a whole conversation around how can you use the iceberg as a metaphor. So that's one category, is using imagery. And in my coaching practice, we talk about, I just did a workshop for the Harvard Institute of Coaching just a couple of days ago on visual coaching and how coaches can use visual techniques like the ones I'm talking about in their coaching practices. So one exercise I do is I have a sheet of emoji faces, and I may say to a client, which emoji face represents how you're feeling today. So they may not say, oh, I'm confused, or I'm stressed, or I'm tired, or I'm happy, but they'll look at the imagery and it kind of forces you to reflect and then say, all right, this is the face that best represents. And I'll say, well, tell me why. What's the story behind it? So we could use imagery as a catalyst for conversations in a way that just asking a question verbally and literally may not elicit a response. So that's just one example of category one. And there's mind maps and there's storyboards, which are visual, but they're also in category two, which is using mental models and frameworks. So you can use Post-its or index cards or sketch something out as a mind map or a storyboard. A company's organizational chart is a visual representation of the hierarchy and reporting structure. So they're all around us. So one of the things I always say is thinking outside the box has become a cliche, but you can't think outside the box unless you have something inside the box. So having boxes and frameworks will help us to simplify the complexity of the world, put them into boxes or categories so we could see them more clearly, and then we see solutions that maybe we hadn't thought about before. So I'll stop there for a second, but that's category one, visual imagery, and category two, models and frameworks.
Well, go ahead, keep going.
All right.
I know there's two more.
Great. So category, I just wanted to pause, see if you had any thoughts or questions. So category three is using metaphors and analogies. So just like the tip of the iceberg and just like the one with the tree, planting the seed, etc. When you use metaphorical language, it helps to make the abstract concrete, the unfamiliar familiar, the invisible visible. So if you say my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June, or so. But metaphors are not just for songwriters and poets. It really is for all of us to say, oh, baseball, that idea came out of left field, or you hit a grand slam, or you really struck out on that presentation. We do that all the time. So I think that's the key, is finding metaphors that resonate with your audience. I used the analogy, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And I had a visual image of the Brooklyn Bridge because I'm from New York, but I did the same workshop with a group in San Francisco via Zoom. I used the Golden Gate Bridge instead. And I did it once with a group in London. I used the Tower Bridge. So when you use a metaphor or an image that resonates with your audience, people think, oh, this person gets me. Right. So I would say meet people not where you live, but where they live, or somewhere in the middle. So in fact, speaking of bridges, I had a textbook in college called Bridges, Not Walls, and words can build bridges between people to connect them, or put up walls between people to divide them, right? So in terms of what you're saying, what you're showing, are you connecting or dividing people through your words and your images? And the last category is storytelling, which could be visual through pictures and imagery, or could be verbal. But again, as I said, stories take people on a journey, right? You have a beginning, middle, and end. Aristotle said that a couple of thousand years ago. But stories are human. They're relatable, they're emotional, they're memorable. So if I'm coaching a manager, I might say, instead of saying to your employee, do these 10 things and don't do these 10 things, you may say, when I had your job, let me tell you about the worst mistake I ever made and what happened and why I have these do's and don'ts. That person's gonna be on the edge of their seat. They want to hear that story, right? So stories stay with us, and they're just more impactful than there's facts, figures, and feelings, right? Facts and figures are the rationale. That's the evidence. The feelings is what you want to capture through the emotion of your storytelling. And again, when you use humor, it lightens the mood and puts people are more receptive and more innovative when they feel good and when they're engaged. But it's got to be relevant, and it's got to be appropriate for a situation. So anyway, those are the four categories. And my whole book, Visual Leadership, breaks it down into examples for those four categories. But in a nutshell, which is a metaphor, those are just a few examples.
And it's interesting that you say all that, because I know most people, when they invest in someone or something, or make a purchase or it's an emotional decision. Yeah. It's very rarely a logical decision. We justify it maybe logically, but usually it's an emotional connection.
And if you think about, I just want to say, building on that, if you think about it, would you link in with someone you didn't know if there was no headshot on their LinkedIn profile? Would you buy an item on Amazon or eBay if it was just the title and description but no picture? Are you more likely to read a blog post that has an image above it or that doesn't? So like the list goes on. We don't even realize if you're on a plane and you look at the that emergency card that shows you where the exits are. If that was a 20-page booklet that you had to read through, no one's reading that, right? But if you open it up and you have, here's the exits and here's the signs. Traffic lights, I talked about this the other day in my workshop. Red, yellow, and green lights is a model I use in my coaching practice. What do you want to stop, start, and continue doing, right? So red light, stop; green light, start; and yellow light, continue. when my mother was in the hospital and they had a pain chart, it said on a scale of 0 to 10, how much pain are you in? And then it said from, little pain to unspeakable pain, but then they had red, yellow, and green emoticon faces that paralleled the traffic light. So they combine words, numbers, and images to help the patient think about how they were feeling, because some people might gravitate towards the numbers, but if you're in the hospital and you're medicated and you're not wearing your glasses or whatever, it's the visuals that people are drawn to first, and then you translate that into the number and then into the language. So it's just interesting. These real life examples are all around us if we even stop to pause to notice them.
Yeah. And you also completely hit on something that I tell people all the time when we're creating images is they're a means of communication, but we need to know who we're speaking to.
Yes. Yeah.
For them to be effective. So talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on using these visuals in whatever form they are to grow a brand.
Yeah, I mean, they're brand logos, right? It's interesting to see, certain logos, you see Nike or Apple, certain ones are immediately recognizable. Others are less so. But you think about what is your own personal brand? Are you a suit and tie type of person, or are you more of a casual type of person? What is the brand you represent on a Zoom call, right? Like someone look at mine, what do they think? Oh, this guy either fakes it or he does read a lot of books, right? So I have all the books, these are mine and these, but I've been reading an average of one business book a week since 1998. So that's about 50 a year for 23 years. So I passed around 1,200 books that I read. But just as you can't judge a book by its cover is an expression, right? We are drawn to its book covers, right? So a good cover can draw your attention while a blank one may not, right? Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is above my shoulder right here, is like my Bible of coaching. And I'm in Marshall Goldsmith's group of MG 100 coaches. On the cover, you can't see it from there, but there's a ladder with a business person standing on the bottom ladder. He's on the second to top rung, trying to reach the bottom rung of the next ladder, but there's a huge gap there, right? So the idea behind what got you, if you just think about the title, what got you to where you are today is not necessarily going to get you to where you want to be unless you find a way to close that gap, right? And that could be through coaching or training, or there's a million ways to do that. But I love, so many people focus on the title. I'm drawn to that ladder image that so many people may not notice because either you're not attuned to it or you're not looking for it. But I always use the Marcel Proust quote that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. So anyone can see new eyes, take a different way to work or walking down the street. If you're in New York, like I am, look up and you'll notice buildings or things that you hadn't noticed before. So it really is just about to train yourself, increasing your visual intelligence by starting to look for things and notice things that maybe you hadn't seen before. I want to ask you as a photographer, there's the foreground and then there's the background, right? Mm-hmm. So you use different techniques of focusing and angles and things like that and lighting, right? To help draw people's attention. So I'm just curious, what are some of your thoughts on how people who aren't necessarily photographers, but can use those types of techniques to help, again, you want to draw people's attention because you're trying to tell a story and communicate a message, right?
And it's interesting because with photography, what people need to realize too is it's two things. It's a relationship with light, but it's also a series of choices. So every time that I frame an image, I'm deciding what to include, what to exclude, what to focus on, what to draw your attention to. Should the light, because the light is an element of the story, should it be harsh light? Should it be soft light? Should it be front light? Should it be back light? There's all of these things. So it's really a series of decisions that go into how to effectively create this image to tell the proper story. And it doesn't mean a right story or a wrong story. It's just the most effective story for that particular person or that particular instance.
Yeah. Well, my favorite examples of that I hadn't thought of in a while that you just triggered, there's a picture of a cow standing in a field. And when they ask people from the Western world, what do you see in this picture? And they'll say, I see a cow standing in a field. People from an Eastern background tend to say, there's a field with a cow standing in it. So it's like, do you notice the object and its environment, or do you start with the environment and then focus on the object? So it's just interesting, just culturally, what we look for, what we pay attention to, what we focus on is a big part of what we notice, right? So know that the art of noticing is like being aware. And that's if you're a manager, who are the people you notice? What are the behaviors you notice? A lot of it is framed through our own lens. But if we can expand our lens, then we'll start to notice things that, maybe that hidden gem idea from someone in your group who's an introvert who hasn't spoken in a while, who almost gets ignored. They sit in the back. I would say, even though I talk loud and fast because I'm a New Yorker, I'm an extreme introvert. I always say I'm a 3Bs guy, a back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm by nature. So everything I do to put myself out there is pushing myself out of my comfort zone. But there were a lot of times that I was in meetings where I had a great idea, a suggestion, but I didn't have the courage or the confidence to speak up and speak out. And that goes back to my school years and then earlier in my career. And you would kind of hope to be called on, but I never had the confidence to raise my hand, right? So who are the people who you should call on? If you create an environment of psychological safety where you don't put people on the spot or make them feel stupid, but you're creating some people just need that space, that opening. And then once you open the door for them, they're going to walk right through it. And so just, again, it's noticing not just ideas and visual imagery, but people too. Who are the people that you may not be giving the attention that they need and could use, and could be, the solution to your problem might be right there in front of you, and you don't even notice it because you don't give it an opportunity.
Agreed. And, I think that's one of the things that I also stumble upon too, is to help somebody build their personal brand. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to be the face of my business, or I don't want to be out in the spotlight. But at the end of the day, and I'm going to go back to your advertising background for this, packaging matters.
Yeah.
The way things are presented matter, because it affects the way we see things, and it affects the way we rate something even. Yeah. So you want to talk a little bit about that from your advertising?
Yeah, well, also, as I was thinking, one of the exercises I do in my workshops is I'll say, you have 2 minutes, take out a piece of paper and a pen and draw a picture of a leader. Right? What does a leader look like? 80% of people, let me ask you if you guess, what do you think the image that people, there's a few different ones, but the one more than any other, if you had to guess, what do you think people draw when I say draw a picture of a leader?
I'm going to guess it's usually male. I'm going to guess it's usually white male.
It's a middle-aged white male in a business suit. Right. So what does that say about the way we frame things in this, world of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, where we're trying to be more inclusive? If even for business women, professionals are drawing that, if you don't have time to think about it, that's the first thing that comes to mind. That's what you draw. But how does that impact hiring decisions? Who gets heard? Who gets promoted? Right. So until we change the picture in our mind's eye, then subconsciously we're going to keep choosing the same people over and over again. So this awareness, sometimes people actually get upset with themselves and kick themselves. It's like, I should know better than that. I do this for a living. And yet that's the picture I drew. Usually the added, they'll draw big ears, which represent listening. They'll draw a watch that represents time management. They'll usually make the leader taller than the followers if they, even if you can't draw, even if you have ICD, which is I can't draw syndrome, and I'm not the greatest drawer in the world, but I always say if you can play Pictionary with your friends and family, you can draw well enough to do this exercise. But yeah, we need to change the picture in our head so that we can change the reality in the world. So that's one of the key examples that I use. So, so speaking of advertising, yeah, it's branding. It's what if the Coca-Cola can was not red but blue? What if Santa was wearing green and not red? So it's like there's certain imagery and color systems, and we could talk for hours just about color coding in society, which is a really fascinating conversation. Why are blue is boys, pink is girls, right? We have labels that we put on things. It's like the whole coloring outside the line, or kids coloring purple hair. It's like, no, you don't, hair is brown or black or whatever, it's not purple. It's like, why isn't it purple, right? So so often we're locked into what our culture or what we're brought up with, and it limits our creativity and innovation and locks us into decisions like the leadership one I just talked about.
How much do you think that we should lean into the visuals we already know and have? For example, from a perspective angle, if you want something to look powerful, a lot of times you'll go at an upward angle. How much should we lean into them, and how much do you think we need to go back to our idea of what a leader looks like? Do we need to change what the visual is?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a subjective question. I think what we should do is just be more aware and be more intentional and purposeful and strategic. And then from there, you can make those decisions on how you angle something, or if something in the shadow. I've heard stories of like darkening, like one of the examples I just thought of when when the whole O.J. Simpson murders was going on, I was living in LA at the time, and how he's on the cover of Newsweek and Time. But I think I forget which one, but one of them really darkened his complexion and took the same image, but darkened it and made him look really, they manipulated the image basically to send a message. It's like, so yes, imagery can be manipulated. And I don't want to get into the politics of the fact that I actually lived on the same block as Nicole Simpson at the time. So that was a crazy time in my life. But also during that time was the Rodney King riots and the Northridge earthquake. So that was a very tumultuous time living in LA in the early 90s. But as you're thinking, you almost replay memories as if you're watching a home movie in your mind's eye, right? So it's like, as you were asking a question, I'm kind of going through my mental Rolodex or my mental file Rolodex that ages me as a baby boomer, but my mental filing cabinet of examples and stories and things like that. But I think the key thing is be aware and be strategic and purposeful, and be aware that people are going to interpret your messaging based on how you present it. So it's good to get multiple perspectives, get input and feedback from other people, because you may see things one way through your lens, but someone else may see it from a completely different angle. So I think those are some of the things to think about.
Very true. And know your audience.
Yes, definitely. No, yeah. I always say one of my models in my book is my three-legged stool model. The seat of the stool represents your purpose. What is the purpose of your presentation or your communication? Sitting on that stool is your audience, right? So who's sitting there? It could be one person, it could be 100,000 people. Then the three legs of the stool are your content, your design, and your delivery, right? So just by breaking it down, just like a stool with less than three legs is going to tip over, if you don't think about the content, what to include, what not to, the design is how do I structure and sequence it, and the delivery is how am I going to ultimately present it. So that's like the 5 parts of designing and delivering any message. So just even though you're not physically seeing it with your eye, I'm sure you could visualize that three-legged stool in your mind just from that verbal visual description. And I always say with your purpose, I actually, when I'm presenting, I show a picture of an aquatic sea animal and people say, oh, is that a dolphin? I'll say, no, it's a porpoise. It's the porpoise of your presentation. So it's gaggable, it's cheesy, but you know what? You will never forget it, right? So as soon as you see that, every presentation needs a porpoise. So the way it's presented, again, it's humor, but it sticks with people years later in a way where if I just said your presentation needs a purpose, could go in one ear and out the other. So again, that's the power of using visual language. And again, humor when appropriate, it just helps to make things stick. Because think about how many messages, whether it's in advertising or just in real life, the number of messages we're bombarded with on a daily basis. I just checked my email this morning. I had 100 emails when I just started my day today. It's like, so how do you cut through the clutter? And again, using visual imagery and visual language will help to do that.
Love it. And with that, I only have 4 final questions for you.
Okay.
First one, what's the best piece of advice you were ever given?
A lot of good pieces of advice. One of them was years ago when I first started my training career. My mentor, Joe Armentano, who I'm still good friends with all these years later, said to me, your content inside and out, but you present it very robotically. There's almost as if there's a glass partition between you and the audience when presenting in person. He said, you need to take a hammer, break that glass wall down and step out and then interact with and engage with the people. Because early in your career, you're so focused on the content and not saying the wrong thing and getting it right that you forget that there's a live audience out there. So that one piece of advice I've never forgotten. But think about the visual imagery of that, right? Of breaking that glass partition, just like the glass ceiling for like women in executive positions. So what is that barrier or obstacle? It could be clear and you may not even see it because it's clear, but once you smash through it, it opens up a world of possibility. So I would say that among many pieces of advice, but that's the first one that popped into my head when you asked that question.
Share with us one thing on your bucket list.
On my bucket list, a lot of things, especially since we've been kind of, lost a couple of years because of the pandemic. I would like to first, just get out more and travel more and just, it's one of the things that's been really nice. I've been having lunches in New York with a lot of friends I've made on Zoom over the last couple of years. So it's been really nice to actually, if not shake their hand, at least hug or fist bump. So that's been nice. Just to connect with more people. Again, as an introvert, it's very easy for me to just stay home and but just to get out there in the world more is something that I'd like to continue to do more of.
When the toy companies finally get around to making an action figure of you, what 2 accessories will it come with?
I love that question, and I have a good answer for it because that's one of the exercises I do. Draw yourself as a superhero. Two things. In my TED talk, I talk about how when I was a kid, people would say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I say Superman, and they say, "Well, what's your backup plan?" I said Batman. So those are my 2 career aspirations. So like Superman, not X-ray vision, but visual thinking is my superpower. And like Batman, who had his bat utility belt, I have a utility belt of coaching tools, visual coaching tools in my toolkit. So my superhero would have a cape, and then but those are the 2 superpowers that my action figure would possess.
Love it. How do people find you?
The best way is go to my website, which is just my name, toddcherches.com. People could download on my list of top 52 book recommendations that had the greatest impact on me. But also link in with me. Just say you saw me on Marlana's show, and I'd like to connect with you. And I'm on LinkedIn all the time, so I love to engage with people. So those are probably the 2 best ways.
And tell us how do they get your book, Visual Leadership?
Anywhere, Amazon or anywhere books are sold. So it's available in audiobook, Kindle, and hardcover. Though there's a certain irony to listening to an audiobook about visual thinking. So the good thing is many people who bought the audiobook have gone on to buy the book too. So it's, yeah, I would say, the book is written in a very visual way, full color on every page, on every few pages. So yes, I would say if you read it, love an Amazon review, or reach out to me. Tell me what you think or any questions that you have.
And they'll be able to see all the visuals in their mind's eye.
They will definitely be able to do that.
Thank you so much for being here, Todd.
Thank you so much, Marlana.
Thank you for joining us. Once again, I'm Marlana Semenza, photographer and visual strategist. Please comment, like, or share this episode, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. For more information on how I can help you create your iconic image, visit marlanasemenza.com.